Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Tuesday, July 21st, week 11, Comparative Cultures, Vancouver, Canada. I'm Mike, I'll be your host this morning, as every morning, because there's nobody else here. I don't know. It's a weird morning for some reason, I don't know why. Okay, so good morning, Lily. Lily's here. Good morning, Lily. I hope you're feeling a little better today. Aliana, good morning. KC's here. Hello, KC. Good morning. Tika's here. Hello again, Tika. Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Good morning, Adalbert. Pearly is here. Good morning, Pearly. Good morning, Nasheed. Nice to see you. Who else? Who else is here this morning? Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Chiffon. So what we'll do today is we'll kind of continue with Greece. We've got maybe a couple more classes of Greece left. Originally, I wanted to finish Greece and then go on to Rome and then go on to the Americas. And we're kind of running out of time. Things are getting a little squished here toward the end. I don't think we're going to get to the Americas, unfortunately. So I think we may end this course just dealing with Rome. As I mentioned to my social justice class, this is, I'm sure you're aware, it's a very busy time of term. There's lots of stuff due and there's exams coming up and everyone's stressed and everyone's tired because we've been working for 11 weeks. And so I try not to cram too much into the end of the course. I try to back off a little bit. So that's what I'll do. We'll try to, we'll finish up Greece. We'll try to finish up Rome. We'll do a little bit of an overall review of what we've been talking about, but we probably won't get to that last bit just because we're out of time and there's no real reason to cram it all into the end. Today, so we'll talk a little bit about Greece. I've also got the final assignment to give you. Final assignment will take the place of the final exam, if you recall. So we'll talk about that a little later in class, and you can ask me questions on it if you desire. But until then, press the wrong button. Until then, let's jump in. So last week, if you recall, on Friday we were in classical era Greece, right? And so we were kind of in the 400 BC range here, and what we're talking about is a period of the Peloponnesian War. And so basically the Greek world becomes divided between the Athenians and their allies and the Spartans and their allies. And so as you read about in the text, this Peloponnesian War goes on for quite some time between these two sides until it finally ends, but we'll talk about that shortly. So we said last week on Thursday and Friday, I believe, we said that the Athenians for a little while were in a pretty good position, right? They'd had two military victories over the Persians, one at Marathon and Thermopylae, I believe, and the second one at Salamis, right? And so the Athenians were able to defeat the Persians twice, which kind of freed up the Aegean for them to move in and become the sort of dominant power in that area. They formed the Delian League in order to, at first, defend themselves from further Persian attacks. You know how those Persians are. To defend themselves from future Persian attacks, but what happened is that the Athenians started to kind of treat the Delian League as their own little empire, and all of the different Greek city-states in the Delian League kind of wound up doing the bidding of Athens. So that original alliance kind of turned into kind of an Athenian empire. And so the Athenians were kind of the powerhouse in the Aegean. They were in charge of most of the other Greek city-states. They had lots of money flowing into them from those other Greek city-states. And so they kind of pushed other places around. They pushed other Greek city-states around a little bit. And they started to use some of that money to beautify their city. And so we heard about that, I think, in the video last week. Pericles, who was a prominent, probably the prominent Athenian politician at the time, convinced Athens to take a bunch of that money and beautify their city. And so one of the major building projects that Pericles completes during that period is the Parthenon. So this complex of buildings on top of the Acropolis. And that really big building you see, of course, is the Temple of Athena, which to some degree is still standing today. Good morning, Jimmy. Good morning, Carmen. Hello, Ella. And good morning, Michael. Okay. And Min. Good morning, Min. So after the Athenians sort of put themselves in charge of the Greek world and fancied up their city with money from the Delian League, Pericles convinced the Athenians to go to war with Sparta. Okay, and the reason is that they were basically masters of the Aegean. They were the top power in this area of the world, except for the Spartans. The Spartans were the only other major power in the area at the time, and so Pericles figured if they could defeat the Spartans, then Athens would be the unquestioned master of the Greek world. And so he sells this plan to the assembly, right? He goes to the Pnyx and makes an impassioned plea to the Athenians to vote to start a war with Sparta. And that's what they vote for. So the Athenian democracy votes to go to war. And so their plan was this. Their plan was to abandon the countryside around Athens and hide within the walls of Athens. So everybody from the surrounding countryside came into the city and they kind of locked themselves into Athens. And so if you think about it, this is kind of the opposite battle plan that they used with the Persians, right? With the Persians, they abandoned the city and went somewhere else. In this case, they are going to stay in the city and abandon the countryside. While they're kind of locked inside the city walls, they are able to supply themselves because they have a port at Piraeus. And so the Athenians are able to use their navy to continually bring in the food and supplies that they need while they're sort of locked in their city. And then the other part of this plan was that they were going to use their ships to attack the Spartan army and then retreat. And so the those triremes that we saw would, sail up. The soldiers would jump off of the triremes. They would fight the Spartans for a little while, and then they'd run away, hop back on the boats, and sail away. That was their plan, and they were hoping eventually they could wear the Spartans down and win the war. And that's, of course, where our reading came along. So I asked you, I asked you on Friday to read that section of the textbook and to answer some questions. And so I'm just going to pull those up now. So the first question I asked you was this one here. So the Athenians vote to go to war with the Spartans, and so they wage war on the Spartans. And both sides are kind of thinking that this will be a short war. Turns out not to be the case. It turns out to go on for a long, long, long time. Why does it go on so long? Casey says some reason because Athens and Sparta have different strengths. Okay. Oh, Cindy, you're always so quick. You're always so quick on the draw. The long duration of the war was partly a result of different strengths. Yeah, and what were those strengths? Pearly says here different strengths. Yeah, Athens was a naval empire. Yes. So the Athens had a very strong navy. They had lots of triremes. Their rowing crews were really good at rowing and maneuvering their ships. The Athenians knew how to use their ships strategically, right? We saw that in the Battle of Salamis. They did a really good job with strategy. So the Athenians are a naval power, but Sparta, on the other hand, is a land-based power, right? So the Spartans are fearsome warriors. We said on Friday they devote their lives to military training. They are the best warriors that the Greek world has to offer, but they fight on land, right? They're a land-based infantry power. And so we kind of have a little mismatch between these two powers, right? The Athenians are strong at sea, but if they try to fight on land, they're going to get massacred by the Spartans. The Spartans are a land-based power, but they have no navy to fight the Athenians. And so these two are kind of really matched in a way that they can't properly fight directly, right? And that's part of what's going to cause the war to go on for so long, because really what you need is a decisive battle, right? You need the Athenians and the Spartans to line up and charge at each other and hack away at each other with swords until somebody is left standing, and then we know who the victor is. But for a long time in that war, that never happens, because again, these two have different strengths, and the Athenians don't want to fight the Spartans on land because they'll lose, and the Spartans can't really fight the Athenians at sea because they don't have a navy. And so these two can't really battle it out and have a decisive victory. And so the war kind of goes on for quite some time as a result. But the war actually went on so long that Athens and Sparta kind of changed a little bit as the character of their city-states changed a little bit as a result of this war. And in what way? So Cindy says, the Athenians became more democratic because they have increased need for manpower to row its fleet. Yeah, so when you depend on huge numbers of people that are at the lowest level of society, and you'll see they're called the Thetes in the textbook. So the lowest kind of the lowest census class. When you depend on those people to row your warships and sort of keep you in the war, those people want a say in the politics of Athens, right? They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be happy just, doing the bidding of the top census class. And so as Athens comes to rely on those lower census class people, those Thetes who are rowing the boats, they are forced to give them more political power. They're forced to include them in the assembly. So Casey says, yeah, Athens becomes more democratic because of their need for manpower. Good. Changes in government. Yes, that's true. Manish is here. Good morning, Manish. So Athens becomes even more democratic, right? They include lower economic classes of people in their democracy because they need them. They need them to row the warships, right? But Sparta changes as well, right? Because Sparta, historically speaking, Sparta is a city-state that kept to themselves, okay? So they were the best warriors in Greece, but they kind of didn't involve themselves in a lot of, in the affairs of other Greek city-states. They didn't really bother with other people. They kind of ignored what was going on in Athens. They just kind of kept to themselves. But once they get involved in this war of Athens, they have to start to ally themselves with other city-states, which they do. And so the Spartans become more involved in Greek affairs, and they sort of create a Peloponnesian League, which is a set of allied Greek city-states with Sparta. And so they become less isolationist. We also see changes in Greek warfare, right? So both the Athenians and the Spartans have to maintain a standing army. Now, for the Spartans, that's not really that big a deal because Spartan society basically is a standing army, right? They don't, Spartan citizens, Spartiates, they don't do anything else except militarily train. They don't farm, they don't make pottery, they don't do any of that stuff. They fight. And so Sparta basically is a standing army. But Athens, we said, Athens people farm and they grow olive trees and they work in the government and they own land. They do all kinds of things. And then if there's a military threat, then they pick up their swords and go to war, right? So Athens traditionally didn't have a full-time standing army, but as a result of the Peloponnesian War, they need to create one, right? Good, that's good. How does this war finally come to an end? And I know it's a bit of a complicated story. You can see there's phases to the war, and there's parts of the war where the Athenians have victory and sometimes where the Spartans have victory. Athens suffers a plague, an outbreak of plague in the middle of the Peloponnesian War, which is devastating. Pericles actually dies of the plague. But finally, this whole thing comes to an end. So I guess this is another change too. This might be an answer to the second one, Cindy. That the war had a detrimental effect on human nature, encouraging a previously unprecedented degree of cruelty on both sides. Yeah, I think that's more an answer to the question of the second one of how did these city-states change as a result of this long war? And so there's the standing army thing, there's the democracy thing, but there's also the fact that warfare became more awful, if that's possible. That's okay, Sabrina. People became more comfortable attacking civilians and regular citizens in the course of this war. But that's important to say too. So how does this war finally end? How does this thing come to an end? How does this thing come to an end? I'm just going to give you a minute to do that because I'm doing something else, but I'll be right back to you. Okay, so Pearly says here, while sieges of cities and attacks on civilians were previously frowned upon, they became the norm by the end of the war. Yeah, again, that's kind of an answer to number two. But number three is how did this war finally end? Who wins? Who wins this war? No? Come on, there's 18 of you out there. Somebody must know how the Peloponnesian War ends. I'm going to heat up my coffee. Come on, how does this war end? Somebody tell me. I've been in suspense for like 3 minutes now. I must know how this war ends. Okay, here's how it ends. It's a very complicated situation because there's a lot of battles, there's a lot of time goes on. Basically what happens is this. Later in the war, the Athenians decide to go to Sardinia. And so there's an island, there's a Greek colony that's allied with Athens, that is being harassed by a Spartan ally. And so the Athenians decide they're going to get in their warships, go over there and help out their allies and humiliate the Spartans at the same time. Now, why they choose to do this, I don't know. But they sail off hoping to, win glory. It goes really badly. Nobody comes back from this. No Athenians at all. Their ships are all destroyed. All the Athenians are killed, and nobody in Athens ever hears from any of these people again. Finally, the Spartans ally with the Persians, and so the Persians offer the Spartans ships, and so now Sparta has a navy. Sparta blockades Athens, so they can't get any food. They can't get any food or supplies into Athens, and they basically wait them out. And so without any access to food, the Athenians run out of food, and basically they have to surrender. So the Athenians surrender, the Spartans take control of Athens, they burn the rest of Athens' fleet, so Athens' glorious fleet of triremes are burned in front of their eyes. Athens' walls are taken down. It's a humiliating, awful defeat for the Athenians. And an end to a long war that probably wasn't a very good idea in the first place. Yeah. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a little pause in the story before we get back into it. And I want to look at a myth, because we've said that myths are important, right? They're important within a culture. They encode meaning, they encode understandings. They teach us morals and lessons and things that we should know. And of course, they also have a role in legitimizing religion, right? Myths support the religious stories that exist within a society. And I wanted to take a look at one particular myth, the myth of Icarus and Daedalus. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is go to Microsoft Teams, and you'll see that I have posted there a link to a video and a few questions to add or to answer on the myth of Icarus and Daedalus. And so what I want you to do is watch the video. It's about, let me just see how long it is here. I'm gonna watch the commercials first. It's about 5 minutes long. And so watch the video, answer the questions as best you can, and then come back here in 8 minutes and we'll talk a little bit about this myth of Icarus and Daedalus and what it might have meant for the Greeks and what it might have meant to the Athenians. Okay, so go to Microsoft Teams, watch the video, answer the questions, and then come back here and we'll talk about what we've seen. Okay, so I'll see you in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Okay, people, and we're back. So, there we have the myth of Icarus and Daedalus, right? And so, Daedalus is an inventor from Athens, murders his nephew because he fears that his nephew will be a better craftsman and inventor than him. He gets kicked out of Athens and goes to Crete to serve King Minos. And then he gets himself into trouble there as well with some pretty uncomfortable and gross sexual activity with animals. Ugh. But Greek myth is full of stuff like that. So he gets himself into trouble with the king. The king imprisons him and his son Icarus at the top of a very tall tower for the rest of their lives. But Daedalus is clever. He invents some wings and attempts to fly both him and his son to safety. But of course, his son flies too high, too close to the sun. The wax in the wings melts, and Icarus falls to his death, right? He flies too close to the sun and dies. So, yeah, what lessons are in here? So, Pearly says, don't try to overcome your limits. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so Daedalus was constantly, and Icarus too, but Daedalus was constantly pushing the limit of what humans could accomplish, right? And so finally he goes too far and he suffers because he's kicked out of Athens, and then he suffers because he's imprisoned, and then he finally suffers because he has to endure the loss of his son, right? And Icarus does the same thing. He tries to overcome his limit, right? He's supposed to stay kind of medium high, and instead he flies too high and pays with his life, right? KC says, don't violate natural laws of mortal men because there will be consequences. Yeah, so the Greeks live in a world where there are gods and there are men, and men are supposed to be mortal. They are not supposed to challenge the gods or try to make themselves better than the gods or act like a god. Karen says, jealousy will be someone's downfall. Do not violate the laws of nature and the gods. Yeah, so this whole story starts off with jealousy about Daedalus's nephew, right? And he murders him. So this whole kind of negative chain of events starts off with that, right? But also don't violate the laws of nature. Sabrina says, yeah, when you violate natural law, you will have to suffer consequences. Yeah, don't break nature's rules and don't break God's rules. Is there... Sorry, I'm just searching my stuff here. That's what I'm looking for. What's the name for that? When people in ancient Greek, or when people in ancient Greek myth, when they violate the rules of mortal people, when they try to make themselves better than the gods, when they have too much pride in themselves, they think they're so great, kind of thing. What's the word for that? It started with an H, and they mentioned it in the video, and we've talked about it before. Do you remember what it is? One word, starts with an H. Hummus, hovercraft, halogen, Heathcliff, horizon, what do you think? Anyone got it? The word we're looking for here is hubris, right? So this is a theme that you see in a lot of Greek myths, where humans think they're better than the gods, they're more skilled or more talented or more beautiful than the gods, and they wind up paying a price, right? And so here, Icarus is a little too excited. He flies like a god and thinks he's so great, but he will pay with his life. And I guess Daedalus is the same, right? Daedalus's hubris is that he thinks he can invent things and create things that are so clever that almost only the gods could create such a thing, right? So he commits some hubris as well and is punished for it. Now, the $1,000,000 question: how do you think this relates to the Athenians? The moral of this story. How does it relate to the Athenians and what we've learned about them? Okay, they should be innovative but not pass the gods. All right. Give me a little more. Be a little more specific if you can. You're not wrong. You're not wrong, Karen. But I'd like you to be more right, if that makes any sense. Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back, you can give me your best answer to this, okay? So you can think about it. Think about it while you're on your break. How does this myth of Daedalus and Icarus, how does it relate to the Athenians in terms of the history that we have just, that we've learned about them, okay? So take a 10-minute break, go stretch your legs, think about the moral of this myth and how it applies to Athenian history, and then when we come back, you can wow me, okay? So I'll see you in 10. Okay, people, and we're back. So, my question for you is the sort of moral or the lesson from this myth of Icarus and Daedalus. So, how might this apply to the sort of history of the Athenians and that we've just dealt with? How might this apply? So, so Karen said they should be innovative but not past the gods. Maybe, maybe, but there's something a little more to that, I think, or something more we could say. Okay, so Casey says Daedalus is an inventor and highly respected by the people, which most Athenian men were. Okay, okay. Um, ah, there you go, Pearly. This is kind of what I was thinking of. So, why do why do the Athenians why do the Athenians attack? Why did they start a war with the Spartans in the first place? It's for glory, it's for power, right? They're not under attack by the Spartans, right? The Spartans are kind of just minding their own business and not bothering anyone. But the Athenians attack them because they feel that then they can be masters of the entire Aegean, right? They can be, head of the Greek world. They can, gain glory and power and all this stuff. And they go after the Spartans, and of course it ends disastrously, right? They wind up having to surrender to the Spartans. The Spartans actually install an oligarchy for a while, and so Athens, for a short period after the Peloponnesian War, they're not even a democratic city-state anymore. Their beautiful navy that they took such pride in is burned to the water. Everything is taken away from them. And so I kind of wonder, is this a myth that they maybe should have paid attention to? Did they fly too close to the sun? Did they think they were, greater than any other city-state? And did they aspire to too much power? Did they aspire to too much glory? When in fact, they could have been a little more modest and probably everything would have been fine for them. But they reached too far, right? They flew too high. They wanted too much. They thought they were, better and smarter and more glorious than everybody else. And they got, as the saying goes, they got a little too big for their boots, right? They got a little too, they had a bit of a swollen head. They thought they were greater than everyone, and so what happens? Well, they fell, right? They were punished. There was a certain amount of hubris, maybe. And so I kind of wonder, I wonder why the Greeks did that, because of course they would have known the story of Icarus and Daedalus, and they would have known many other myths in which characters in the myth were guilty of hubris and they were punished for it. And so it's interesting to think that the Athenians would have sort of committed hubris at the same time and then been punished in a similar way. Interesting. Okay, let's move on. So again, we said that nobody thought this war would last very long. Probably the Spartans thought they would just fight a decisive battle with the Athenians and they would win or lose and then it would be over. But this war goes on for 27 years, and in part it goes on for so long because these two powers are mismatched, right? Athens is a naval power, Sparta is a land-based power, and so they can never really have the sort of decisive battle that they need to have to, either win or lose the war. We said that both of these city-states changed as a result of the war, Athens becoming a little more democratic, and Sparta becoming less isolationist. They were They sort of integrated more into the Greek world because they formed alliances with other city-states. The Peloponnesian League, it was called. We said the nature of warfare changed as well, and so attacks on cities and on citizens became more common in the Peloponnesian War. But also, and we didn't talk about this, previously war was kind of a seasonal thing. And so in the ancient world, I may have mentioned this already, but in the ancient world, if you were fighting a war, you still had to do your farming, and you still had to do the harvest, right? If you don't harvest the crops, then everyone is going to starve. And so people would, fight a war and they'd be, hacking at each other. But when it was time to harvest the crops, everyone would kind of time out and go home and collect the crops, because otherwise you were all going to starve. But that doesn't really happen in this period, as both armies, the Athenians and the Spartans, are supplied with food from outside, and so the war kind of carries on year round. Whereas more traditional wars, they fight usually in the summer, and then in the fall, when the crops ripen, everybody goes home and collects the crops. So the war gets a timeout, if you will. So the Athenians had this grand plan to defeat Sparta and to be masters of the Aegean, and it all ends in tears, right? It's a big failure. The Athenians are inside of the walls of their city, but unfortunately they have an outbreak of plague partway through the war. Lots of people die. It's a very miserable and sort of disgusting inside Athens, as all of these people are dying of plague. Pericles himself will die. The war keeps dragging on, but nobody's able to really win it because the two sides are so mismatched. Athens finally decides to, I think I said Sardinia, but it's Sicily. Sorry about that. Athens attempts to assist an ally in Sicily who are being threatened by the Spartans, and so they sail off in order to humiliate the Spartans, but it's a disaster. Nobody returns, no Athenians return from this battle. And so in a vulnerable state, Athens is sort of in a vulnerable state, and so the Persians offer the Spartans a navy. The Spartans accept it. They blockade Athens, so they can't import any more food. And finally, Athens is forced to surrender, and the Spartan burns the Athenian navy, which I'm sure must have been a terrible sight for Athens. Like I said, for a little while afterwards, Athens isn't a democratic state because they're under control of the Spartans, and the Spartans install an oligarchy. But eventually, the Athenians are able to overthrow these guys and restore their democracy again in 403. But what's kind of interesting is that after the Peloponnesian War, the sort of character of Athens changes, and so it still remains a democracy after they overthrow those Spartan rulers that are put in. Still remains a democracy, but it becomes a different kind of city. And so before the Peloponnesian War, Athens is very kind of wealthy, it's very imperialist, it's got a big navy, a big military force, and it goes around sort of taking control of other city-states and pushing them around. And so it's a very kind of imperialist, aggressive military power. But after the Peloponnesian War, when the Spartans burn Athens' navy and tear down its walls, the character of Athens kind of changes, and Athens becomes more of an intellectual city. And so it's a city that's known a little bit more for its drama, its art, its architecture, its philosophy, things like that. And so pre-Peloponnesian War, Athens is kind of a militaristic city-state. After the Peloponnesian War, it's more of a artistic kind of city-state. Which is what brings us to where we are now. So I have a little more of that Athens documentary I'd like you to watch. I was considering not having us watch any more of it but I think it's still good, and I think we've kind of committed to the first half of it at least, so we should probably watch a little more, see where it goes. I know where it goes. So I have a little more for you to watch. And so what I'm going to do, again, is I'm going to post what I want you to watch in Student Portal, okay? So it's the next section of this, democracy. Hang on just one second here. It's the next section of this democracy. The next section of this documentary, not democracy. And so I've got another section for you to watch, and I've got a bunch of questions for you to answer. And so again, the video is going to pick up at a place where the Peloponnesian War is kind of ending, and Athens is kind of evolving into a different type of city. And so this section of the video is going to talk a little bit about Athenian art, specifically Athenian sculpture. It's going to talk a little bit about drama and tragedy. And so these are plays that the Greeks put on. So if you're in English class, you might read Oedipus Rex, or you might read Antigone, or other plays by Sophocles or Aeschylus or Sophocles, other sort of great Greek playwrights. And so we'll learn a little bit about art, we'll learn a little bit about philosophy, and we'll learn a little bit about how Greek religion and Greek rational thought, logical, rational, scientific thought, are actually a little more connected than sometimes historians want to admit, right? And so when we started watching this documentary, Bettany Hughes told us that we had sort of whitewashed Athens, right? We had sort of imagined Athens a certain way, and then we copied them. But ancient Athens wasn't really how we imagined them to be. And so the documentary will talk about how religion and ritual were actually kind of tangled up in the Greek legal system, okay? Yeah, and then it'll talk a little bit more about Greek drama and Greek plays. So what I'll ask you to do now is to go to Microsoft Teams and watch the section of the documentary that I've posted there. And so it's about, how long is it? It's there 16, it's about 25. So watching that section of the documentary and answering the questions will probably take the rest of class. So I'm going to send you to Microsoft Teams. I'm going to turn you loose and get you to watch the documentary and answer the questions. We'll deal with that first thing tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll also deal with the final paper. And so I meant to do that today, but the timing is not really going to work. But I have posted the final research paper assignment in Microsoft Teams in files, and I've posted it in course documents in Student Portal. So if you want to look at the assignment between now and tomorrow when we talk about it, you can, or I'll talk about it in class tomorrow. Either way, but it's already there. But what I'll do for now is, again, I'll turn you loose, go watch the documentary, answer the questions, type them out, and then first thing tomorrow, that's what we'll take up. We'll talk about the answers to those questions. And so, do you have any questions for me right now that I can answer for you? Because we've dealt with a few things. We've dealt with myth. We've dealt with the Peloponnesian War. We've dealt with hubris. Okay, so Cindy's okay. Who else is okay? Or not okay? Carmen's good, okay. Casey's good, okay. Sam's good, all right. Pearly's good. Good catch on that myth, by the way, Pearly. That was nice. Sheed's good, okay. Karen's good. Sabrina's okay, all right. Adelbert's good, okay. Okay, so I'll turn you loose. Go watch the video on Microsoft Teams. Answer the questions. We'll do that first thing tomorrow. Aliana's good. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Tomorrow, questions and talking about the final paper, which will take the place of a final exam. Okay, so enjoy this part of the documentary, and I'll see you all first thing tomorrow. Well, not first thing. I'll see you all at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, so bye.